surely you would all know about the Liberals. Turnbull has just announced that they're bringing back deregulation, Christopher Pyne's 2014 plans. It's absolutely disgusting, an absolute shame on the Liberal government to bring back this policy, which is a clear attack on poorer students and poorer people trying to access tertiary education. Absolute shame. Turnbull has proved himself to absolutely be the same as Tony Abbott and Chris Pyne. The attacks now, in fact, are actually worse than they were in 2014. Turnbull, as far as students' rights go, is a worse PM than Abbott. But I guess to get things started, we're going to do an acknowledgement to country, which is going to be given by Enoch here. So Enoch is the State Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Officer for the National Union of Students. Welcome.
Yes, Enoch!
Thank you. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, upon whose stolen land the University of Sydney is built. It is a privilege here to gather in protest on Aboriginal land, and the Liberal government is disgusting. The Gadigal people are the traditional custodians and caretakers of this land, but to fully express the complex and spiritual relationship Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander nations share with their sacred land is nearly impossible. I welcome my Aboriginal brothers, sisters and friends who are here with us today. I acknowledge that the Gadigal people and those of the Great Eora Nation were the first to suffer, resist and survive the brutalities of white supremacy in Australia. The centuries-long resistance of Australia's Indigenous community endures as non-Indigenous Australians continue to benefit from the colonisation of sovereign Indigenous land. I acknowledge the atrocities of the stolen generation, the untold destruction it inflicted on Indigenous families through forced child removal and the identity struggles it gave rise to. The ongoing kidnapping of Indigenous children and calculated attempts to dismantle our families continue today, with more children than ever being taken away by the colonial Australian government. I acknowledge the role of the police. Shame on the police in continuing to suppress the Indigenous population through racial profiling, police brutality and alarming rates of deaths in custody. These everyday injustices contribute to the fact that this country's Indigenous people continue to be one of the most over-policed and over-incarcerated populations in the world. I acknowledge the struggles of Indigenous women, clap for our Indigenous women, who face the highest rate of sexual assault and domestic violence in this country, and Indigenous men who experience the highest rates of incarceration and suicide in this world. We offer our deepest respect to Indigenous leaders throughout history who fought to defend our land, our culture and our people. We pay our respect to the brave warriors of the frontier wars who are continually forgotten in Australia's war histories, to the scores killed by foreign disease, to every Indigenous child, adult and elder who has died at the hands of white supremacy, and to all those who continue to live in the face of it. So when we march today, let's remember that we march on Indigenous land, and let's march for not only our education, but an education that caters for Indigenous students. The funding cuts, 100K degrees is not okay, and the Liberal government will not get away with this. This is a direct attack on Indigenous students all over this country. So let's protest loud and clear, because Indigenous sovereignty never ceded. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Enoch. I'll just introduce us quickly. My name is Ashlyn. I'm the Education Officer at UNSW, and this is Jean, the NUS New South Wales State Branch Education Officer, and we've been working with and inside the National Union talking to students just this morning about how devastating deregulation and changes to HECS will be for them and for people they know. So next up, I'd like to introduce Michael Elliott, who is the NUS New South Wales State Branch President. So.
Thank you, everybody. It's great to be here today. I'd like to first begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and launch into it. So today's students are facing huge threats to our education. Last September, when Tony Abbott was shafted and Malcolm Turnbull took his place as Prime Minister, we came in with a refreshed vibe. The ghastly Christopher Pyne was tossed out. the lesser known Simon Birmingham took over, and around that time it was kind of tossed around that it was the same shit with a different smell. But after a few months, I think we've had a bit of time for it to sink in that really it's the same shit with the same smell. Deregulation, back on the table. Cuts to funding, back on the table. Changes to HECS, back on the table. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to survive in this kind of gridlock through most of my degree, and I'll be lucky enough to hopefully graduate before these changes, if they do go ahead, take full effect. But I have two younger siblings who I really care about, and I want them to be able to get the same standard of education at the same cost. It's not fair or equitable to make any student pay $100,000 to get an education, but it puts so much more perspective into it when it's people who you care about who will have to bear the brunt. What concerns me most is the way the Liberals want to undermine HECS. By raising the interest rate and lowering the repayment threshold from $54,000 to $42,000, the government will be forcing graduates who aren't yet financially stable to pay up. If you do the math, it's full-time workers who are earning around $20 an hour who are going to be the ones who have to pay up. That's barely more than the minimum wage. We've already seen recent university graduates get screwed by this government with the threatened changes to the New Start allowance, and this only takes it further. Wanting to get an education shouldn't be something you have to worry about, and tinkering with the system that has allowed more young Australians to access uni is the wrong way to go about reforming the sector. It's our job as students of today to stand up for those who will one day sit in the lecture theatres that we do and make sure that they get the best quality education possible without signing up to a lifetime of hardship to repay a larger debt while they're earning less. In 2014, when $100,000 degrees were first put on the table, we saw some of the biggest student protests since the Stop VSU campaign. I still remember that post-budget snap action, which drew hundreds of students to this very spot, and how great it would be if we could start up something like that again this year. Now, we don't know exactly what's going to be in this budget, but we can hazard a guess from the rhetoric that there's going to be pain. That's where I think NUS comes in. Our 2014 education campaign gained national attention, and our national representatives forged relationships with the crossbench senators who would be instrumental in voting the HERA bill down. This experience proves that NUS is still a powerful voice in the fight for a fair education, and I'd like to take this opportunity to briefly address some of the recent talk about our national union. It's been hugely disappointing that ANU and Adelaide look unlikely to re-accredit to the union this year. ANU's been hostile for a while, but the decision at Adelaide was pushed through by hard right Liberals. We can't let the Tories dictate the terms of our fight. NUS will be there for all of you this year, and we'll take the fight right up to Turnbull and the Liberals leading up to this year's election. But you need to be there for us too. A union is only as strong as its members, which I want to appeal to everyone here to support the National Union of Students in our efforts in whatever way you can. Whether it's leafleting or postering, or not writing an article which paints us in a bad light, or convincing our friends and comrades at other campuses that getting involved and accrediting to the NUS is a great way to make our voice stronger. I look forward to working with all of you and hopefully seeing a bigger crowd out here when we next protest on May the 11th after the budget is handed down. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Michael. Yeah, you mentioned all the other attacks that the Turnbull government are making, particularly the 20% cut in funding to universities. There's also a bunch of attacks that's been announced on HECS. So yeah, they want to lower the threshold to $42,000. They want to start charging students if they live in a household with an income of over $80,000, which is just ridiculous. And they also want to start taking HECS from the dead, basically. They want to start raiding the estates of dead students for the money they owe on HECS. All of these things are absolutely ridiculous, and when it's all going on, Malcolm Turnbull has millions of dollars stored in offshore tax havens and everything. Like, they talk about kind of budget blowouts and there's not enough money in all of that, but yeah, these people are actually just hiding away their millions of dollars. The next speaker is Rob Long. He's from TAFE and the Teachers Federation. TAFE has been under attack by the government for years now, and the Teachers Federation has waged an excellent campaign against that. So here's Rob.
Thank you. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land that we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Also like to thank Jean and the organisers from the NUS for putting this speak out on today and inviting us to discuss TAFE issues. Also like to acknowledge Jenny Leong, who's the local member for Newtown in the State Parliament. Congratulations for coming, Jenny, and supporting this speak out. And I'd also like to thank the Whitlam government from 1972 that I was about 10 years old. I actually distinctly remember it. My father was incredibly excited at the election of a Labor government after 22 years. After a long campaign, they introduced free education, as the Greens sticker is here saying, and the no debt saying. And I was lucky enough, pretty unique generation, I was lucky enough to get a free university education. And yeah, I think give that a clap. The Whitlam government brought that in. It was unfortunate, actually, it was the Hawke government, another ALP government, that actually brought in HECS. And I remember campaigning in the late 80s to stop HECS. And I wanted to encourage you now to keep this campaign going. I've been going since about 1985, campaigning for free university education, and unfortunately we're losing at the moment. And the campaign needs to ramp up. At the moment, in relation to TAFE, and I'm representing the New South Wales Teachers Federation today, and we send again, Teachers Federation send our congratulations to the NUS for organising these rallies, is that the Teachers Federation is continue to campaign for public education, free public education for TAFE students, and unfortunately we're losing that at the moment as well. Thanks. The relationship for TAFE students starting diploma is actually even worse than it is for your current HECS system. TAFE students and diploma actually, it is deregulated fees. It is full cost recovery for diploma students, for TAFE students, plus a 20% fee for the right to get this loan, which they call help. It's a disgrace. We're going to continue to fight for that. We encourage you to continue to fight for that. We would ask you to campaign with us. There's a campaign webpage, stoptafecuts.com.au. Get on your phones now, please link and support that campaign as we go through. We're happy to walk with you and campaign with you in relation to making sure that we maintain free public education post-school for all Australians. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, so just before we go to the next speaker, I would just ask you all to join in a little chant with me. Some of you will know this one. No cuts! No fees! No corporate universities! 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 Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so the next speaker that we have is an activist here from USYD. Her name is Georgia Mantle. She is the Indigenous Officer and the General Secretary of the USYD SRC, so please make her feel welcome.
Thanks guys, and thank you for welcoming me with that chant. As a lot of you guys would know, the last time I was chanting that, I was getting pushed out of this very building and getting bashed by the police. So during my time at this university, I'm constantly being reminded that I don't belong, that I'm not the student that this university or the tertiary education system more broadly was made for. And I was reminded that in a stark way last week when Spence and this university allowed riot cops to come onto this campus and bash students for taking a stand against the Liberal government's cuts. The Liberal government's proposed cuts to education are going to affect everyone and every student. But the students hit the hardest will be the marginalised groups who are already alienated by the education system. This means Indigenous students, women, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, and migrant families and students. Many of the same politicians who benefited from free education are now determined to destroy the higher education system through fee deregulation, by lowering the income HECS repayments, and by cutting funding to the sector. And if that wasn't enough, now they want to start collecting debts from the dead. The Liberal government is not only cutting funding, but they're aiming to completely change the system for the worst by shifting to a deregulated system and changing the repayments system. But you know what? The Liberal government isn't the only ones trying to attack education. The Labor Party recently, who supposedly is the party that puts people first, scrapped student startup scholarships and turned them into loans, repayable under the HECS scheme. The cuts to government funding will see a reliance on private funding, which will just increase the way in which universities are run like businesses. For Spence and Belinda, this will be great. It will mean that they get to increase the money going into their pockets, but for us, we'll be the ones that suffer. Deregulation will mean that the bigger universities, like the one we're standing on now, will be able to trade on their prestige and charge the highest fees. The shift to the HECS and HELP loans from interest-free to interest-bearing will hurt those who earn less income after completing their degree, because the amount of interest owed will be compounded. You know who will be affected by this the most? Women. Because while we already have a wage gap, when we are expected to pay back the same amount of debt, yet we're earning less, we're just going to be the ones who are screwed over in the long run. The Liberal government needs to stop this bullshit. They need to stop pretending like they can run our education system like a business. Education is a right for everyone, and it is our right to demand free education. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Georgia. So the next speaker that we have is Mark Johnson from the NTEU. He's the Vice President of the General Staff section here. And something to remember that's really important is that staff are often quite affected by the same cuts that students are. The restructure here at USYD bears down extremely heavily on the general staff. Michael Spencer stated that he wants to make the number of general staff as low as possible. So here to show student staff solidarity, please welcome Mark Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Teachers Federation. We love you too. I'd like to acknowledge and pay respect to the traditional owners of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and I pay respect to their elders past and present. The Australian community as a whole has long had the attitude that access to education is a basic condition of the good life. By opening our universities to more than the privileged few, the Whitlam government fundamentally changed this country for the better. Education is a public good. We all collectively benefit from broad access to education. We are empowered by education to contribute to our communities. It is right that we pay for education collectively. It is right that those who benefit most from our education system, the wealthy, business owners and employers, should contribute most through taxation. But we know they don't like paying their fair share. Successive governments, at the behest of the wealthy, have whittled away at the concept of free public education at a tertiary level and below. And that does include, unfortunately, the Labor Party, starting off with the HECS system. But the worst reform proposed since the Whitlam government is university deregulation of fees, which was announced by Abbott in 2014's budget, and eagerly supported by the thin, shiny layer of corporatist university management, the vice-chancellors that sit atop but are not representative of our universities. Virtually nobody else in the university community thinks that fee deregulation is a good idea. When it was first proposed in 2014 at Sydney University, we campaigned for a convocation, which is a crusty old tradition. It was back from a time when the university community was an intrinsic part of the governance of the university. Threatened by the possibility of such rampant anarchic participation by lowly staff and alumni, the Vice-Chancellor tried to appease this with one of his tightly orchestrated town halls. But the VC couldn't spin the overwhelming opposition to deregulation. Despite the orchestration, the message was absolutely undeniable from the university. We do not want
the management of the university to charge whatever it likes to students. Because education, like healthcare, is a fundamental necessity. You need to be here, and you know you need to be here. And that puts you in an extremely vulnerable position if the management, the people that are bean counters in the university can just decide what they charge you, because you will pay them. So we've got to stop this. There is no doubt that those of us who value inclusion, who think that access to education is a basic right, who believe that a well-educated public is vital to the health of our society and our ability to hold the powerful to account, there is no doubt that we stand against this set of reforms. So we pushed back and we succeeded. The Abbott government didn't get this aspect of their budget passed. They didn't get almost anything of their budget passed. Deregulation was something that we successfully fought by bringing together all of the community groups, all of the people who are interested in the continued access to public education in our society to lobby the decision makers concerned. It's one of the reasons why the Turnbull government has talked about a double dissolution, is they know right now that the government is too representative of the public. And they want to capture seats in the Senate that will allow them to ram through this crap. In September 2015, the Education Minister Simon Birmingham said, "Today I am announcing that higher education funding arrangements for 2016 will not be changed from currently legislated arrangements while the government consults further on reforms for the future. It gives me as the new Minister and Malcolm Turnbull as the new PM time to consult and discuss with the university's Vice-Chancellors, students, about what is possible to address some of the challenges." Now, aside from the utter vacuity of that statement, students, do you feel consulted?
No! We have not been consulted.
Has Birmingham turned up to any of your meetings to listen to you?
No!
He doesn't give a stuff what you think. He knows you don't want to pay through the nose to get what is basically your right. Obviously, you're not going to agree to that. So he's not going to consult with you. He's only going to talk to the people that he knows are reliably going to agree with him. And at the moment, that is really only the Vice-Chancellors and people that don't like paying their taxes.
Against university policy.
So, Birmingham now says, we have only ever said that we are deferring implementation of those reforms by 12 months. So basically, the policy of fee deregulation needed to rest in its coffin whilst the daylight passed. We've got to put a stake through its heart. It can't keep coming back every time. We've said what we think. The Australian public has said what we want. Now it is time to demand that they stop bringing it up. I don't think that the Turnbull government is actually going to say that we're going to deregulate fees. They won't say that before the next election. They'll talk about challenges, they'll talk about discussion and consultation, they'll talk about the need for reform. But the reform won't be funding education properly. But they'll talk about it in these vague terms so that they have a halfway decent chance of gaining more absolute power when if they win the next election. So we have to beat them at that point. We have to make sure that the coalition government is defeated in this next election. We need everyone here. We need their friends. We need their friends' friends to get out there and convince the public that something really basic is at stake. Something that has characterised our society for the better for decades is at stake. And they will take it away from us if we don't kick them out. So, everyone here needs to get involved. It means more than coming to rallies. Rallies are important, but it means talking to people whose votes can swing. It means talking to people on the street. It means talking to people on train stations. It means talking to your parents. It means talking to your grandparents. Every single one of these people is going to be every person we need to enlist so that we can push back and secure and improve access to education for the betterment of our society and future generations.
Thanks heaps for that, Mark. Okay, next up we have Jenny Leong. So Jenny's Jenny's from the Greens. She's a member of Parliament for Newtown. And yeah, she's been fighting for student rights for years now. So here she is.
Thank you very much. Thank you to NUS and to the Sydney Uni Education Action Group and all of the other amazing student activists that have taken the time to organise this action today. I'd like to acknowledge that we are on the land of the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation and pay our respects to their elders, past, present and emerging, and to recognise, as was said when we had the acknowledgement to start with, the fact that the cuts that we are seeing to universities, the increases to fees that we are seeing to universities have a disproportional impact on those that are from marginalised or less supported parts of our society, and that means that that is outrageous, because what we need to be seeing is that education is actually a right. Education is a way that we address inequality within our society. Free education is what we need to see to be able to address that inequality. And what we are instead seeing is successive governments, and other speakers have said it, and I would also say, unfortunately, we have seen successive federal governments, both Labor and Liberal in colour, moving steps that will see that fees are increased, that cuts to universities occur, and a privatisation to our education system happens across the board. And this is unacceptable. It's unacceptable for two really, really clear reasons. The first reason that isn't unacceptable is because of the issue of equity. Because actually we know, and evidence shows, and around the world we see, that the best way to address inequality in our society is allowing people to access free public education. That is how we boost up the rights of women. That is how we address the wage gap. That is how we address the minorities in our community that are not treated fairly. And that is how we get over the injustice and the bigotry and the discrimination within our society, by ensuring that everyone has the right to access free public education. But if that wasn't enough, there's another clear reason why we need to fight this agenda, which attempts to privatise the universities, cut the funding to universities and increase fees and put that burden on students. And the reason for that is that we already know that there's a whole lot of other money there that is being given to the corporate sector through tax evasion, through tax cuts, and through a whole lot of other, pretending to be in the interests of the economy and the people cuts that we see going to the corporate sector. We know that there are ways to make money within the federal budget that will actually enable education to be free in this country. But what it takes is for people that don't have a vested interest in propping up their corporate mates. And unfortunately, it's pretty unsurprising to see that the current Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, has a vested interest in wanting to prop up his corporate and finance and business mates. What we know though, and this is the thing to always remember, is that we don't win these kind of campaigns because people that sit in Parliament make the change. We don't win these kind of campaigns because we ever see that Malcolm Turnbull or the alternative Prime Minister, Bill Shorten, all of a sudden wake up one day and go, oh, actually, sorry, I forgot. I do genuinely care about people. I forgot that they're the ones that elect me, and I forgot that I should actually put their interests first before the interests of the corporate folks that donate massive amounts of money to our political parties for our own self-interest. They're not going to do that. The way that they change their agenda and the way that we stop them, as we have stopped them before, is to say that we have had enough. The way that we stop them is to mobilise on the streets, and the way that we stop them is to hold them to account and say this is not good enough. This is not the kind of society that we want to live in. We want to live in a society where everyone has the right to go to university, where everyone has the right to go to TAFE, where everybody has the ability to be able to access a strong, well-funded public education system in this country. And the only way that we can do that is by making sure that we make it free, that we make it public, and we make it accessible. That is how we address inequality in our society. That is how we get the society that we want. And we won't get it by waiting for any politician in Canberra or any politician in Macquarie Street to deliver it. We'll get it because we'll come out on the streets, we will campaign together, we will mobilise, and we'll make it clear that that is the society that we expect. That is the community we want, and that is the future that we see, and it's a future that includes everyone, not just the corporate vested interests that they seem to cave into. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Jenny. Okay, guys, so now we're going to march to the quad and take it to a big fan of corporate universities, Michael Spence. Let's go.
The students united will never be defeated. The students united.
United! Be defeated!
Comrades, thank you so much for turning out today. It is so important to see students getting involved on their campuses and speaking to people about what's going on in Canberra and on Macquarie Street at the moment about higher education. We're all here because we believe in one fundamental thing, and that is that higher education is a right, not a privilege. And if you believe that, you believe that from the day that someone drops their kid off at preschool to the day someone's got their master's is free at the point of use. Because we believe that tertiary education in this country is a right, not a privilege. In the coming months and weeks, we're going to be involved in more actions around this with NUS. On the 11th of May, there's going to be our next National Day of Action. That's going to be our budget response. We're going to be expecting a 20% cut in federal funding. We're going to be expecting 25% hike in fees. And we're going to be expecting dereg back on the table. And that's something that we're going to be fighting against. Make no mistake that that 20% cut in funding is not something that's there because it's an economic necessity. It's there because it's political. One of the best investments for our government is higher education. Every dollar you put into higher education is $7 back in tax revenue and an extra $24 back into the economy. If you went to some of the North Shore swine that get involved in the Liberal Party and you said that for every dollar you put in, you got $7 back, that would be fantastic for them. But with higher education, it's a different issue because they don't want people to be educated. It's not a priority for them, but it's a priority for us, and it's something the public are massively against. Having over 70% of people in this country against fee deregulation is huge, and it's something that we've got to build for rather. Of course, over the coming months, get involved in your campuses, speak to students, whether that be turning out, hopefully July 2 at the ballot box to kick Malcolm Turnbull out, or whether that be having more national days of action, more actions on your campus and supporting the work that NUS is doing would be fantastic. And it's something we need to have happen in order to kick Malcolm Turnbull out. Thank you again, everyone, for coming here today. And it's absolutely fantastic to see so many people getting involved with NUS. Thank you all.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like!
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like!
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like!
This is what democracy looks like. Awesome, thanks for that, Max. I just wanted to give a quick shout out before wrapping up to the MUA. So the MUA is currently protesting against the attacks on their members as well. They're going into a bargaining period at the moment, and the wharfies are facing a lot of pressure from their bosses. So absolute solidarity with the MUA. One of their key demands is actually for free education as well. So yeah, good on them for that. So just before I wind up, I just wanted to let everyone know about the post-budget rally on May 11th. So yeah, we all know dereg is back on the agenda. We have to fight back hard against this. We've beaten it twice, we're going to do it again. So everyone should come out on May 11th to that protest. But more than that, you should help us build. You should help us build for the rally because that's what's actually going to make it big. So get involved in your ed collectives, hand out some flyers, let students know, let your friends know, do lecture batches, put posters up. All of this really, really helps get people out to the rally and actually know about deregulation and the attacks being made. So yeah, good on everyone for coming out. Come back May 11th, get involved in your ed collectives. Thanks. No cuts, no fees, no corporate university.